Welcome to Two Bees in a Pod. I am Bilola.
And I am B. Leonga, and this is a podcast about immigrant experiences in the U.S., sharing our perspectives on various topics,
Including straddling cultures, fitting in, staying connected, learning and unlearning the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to another episode of Two Bees in a Pod. This week we're going to be discussing our October book of the month, which is The Crown of Thorns by Linus Asong. This is a Cameroonian classic, and anybody who went through the Anglophone school system knows this book very well. Whether you did arts or science, you're familiar with this book. But before we get into the episode, today is a very special day because our podcast is 1 year old today. Today is our first birthday. Our first episode came out October 23rd, 2023.
Great.
So exactly
Ooh.
1 year. I mean, this episode is going to be released on the 28th, so you're listening to this after the fact, but go over to our Instagram and wish us a happy belated birthday. By the way, I know that you love astrology so much. I did the birth chart of our podcast. Our podcast is a Libra,
Oh,
which
God.
it was almost a Scorpio.
Character energy. That's all I know about Libras.
I think it's a good thing because Libra, the sign of Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus is a planet of women, femmes,
Okay.
and
Fair.
queer people. Yeah, so I think I'm glad that, they did not
Fair enough.
go into Scorpio territory because Scorpios are toxic.
Scorpios. Hey, I have
Exactly.
two Scorpios. I have two Scorpios in my life. I don't know if they embody those traits.
I know a Scorpio couple, like they're both Scorpios. So I mean,
I just
maybe
feel
it's
like
a match made in
that's
heaven.
or hell.
Oh, that's right. No, they're both lovely. So
Are they like kind?
Mhm.
Because my Scorpios, they're a little rash. I mean, they're like kind people, but they're also people who, I don't know how to explain it. They're not unkind per se, but I'll say they're not nice, which that's fair, but they're not very nice.
No, the ones that I know are they're both nice. Anyway, look at us. It's typical. This is really our birthday because we've gone off on a tangent right from the start.
Yeah, as
So
always.
the icebreaker that I chose for this episode is kind of related to the book, right? So the question is, what is a native tradition or belief from your tribe or region of Cameroon that you're glad has fallen by the wayside? So something that used to be practiced or believed back in whatever you consider the old days that is no longer in circulation, and you're happy that is no longer in circulation.
So, in the great tribe of Balinyonga, we finally covered our shame. I think this was stopped maybe about 20 years ago. Widows used to get really, really bad treatment. And I have to be very clear and specific, just women, not widows. So women who lost their husbands, they got treated really badly. And I don't understand what the sentiment behind that was. But there was like having to sleep on the floor, sit for several days, no shower, and then they would shave your head really rudimentarily, and the mourning period was extensive. I think in 2004 was when the fund decided to change that and like scrap some of like that sitting on the floor, no shower, and they reduced the official mourning period was reduced. I don't remember, but it was reduced reduced by a lot. And so you are allowed to like mourn for a certain amount of time, much less, and you can remove your white, which is the garment of mourning, a lot sooner than previously. And I think it was necessary because women were going through hell, and then you had in-laws who take advantage of this situation, especially if you married from outside Bali. So if you're not from Balinyonga and you married into Balinyonga, it was not fun, it was not easy. And so I think stepping and bringing us into civilization was a step in the right direction.
How does the property inheritance work? Like, does the widow get the property, or does it go to the children, or
I don't know. I don't know. My grandfather had a will, so I
very
don't know.
modern man?
It was necessary. He was polygamous,
All
so
right,
there
all
was a
right.
will, and I remember everybody who was present going to the will reading at the same time. So there was no little snafu about
Mm,
what wishes or if there was any changes. I don't know. I don't know, but that's interesting that you asked because I know that in succession is matrilineal, and on the surface it sounds feminist, but it's still steeped in misogyny because succession is matrilineal basically because they said the only children they can guarantee belong to the family are the sister's children. And so when you pass away, your property goes to your sister's children. But people
that
say
makes sense.
in modern times, say if it's not property that you inherited. So if you buy your own land or buy a lot, the more modern men are putting the things that they purchased in their wife's names or the children's name, and it is separate from family property that they inherited, so that um their nephews or don't come kick them out.
That makes sense. Okay, the one from Bakuri Culture or History didn't, hear of this first. I read it from a book that, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, where if you were suspected of being a witch, I don't know if it was both genders, witch, wizard, but the book just said witch, so I don't know if it was gender
It's probably
specific.
women.
Probably, because I mean, this is a global phenomenon, right? Salem witch
Yeah.
trials, all of
Celebration.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're suspected of being a witch, they would boil, there's a leaf of a certain tree, they would boil it and give you to drink. If you threw up, then that means that you were pure and you were not a witch. If you didn't throw up, that means you were a witch and they would hang you. And again, this kind of phenomenon of testing women for witches, it's worldwide, right? We talked about the Salem witch trials. When I was in England over the summer, I went to an old castle, like did a tour, and I forgot what century it was, but if you were suspected of being a witch, they would prick you with a needle. And it's like if you bled a certain way or if you did not bleed, then you were a witch and
Hey
they would
God.
kill you. And
So if
it's
you're
like
hemophiliac or anemic,
the most ridiculous things. So it's really fascinating to see, like, all over the world, there were these, kind of trials for women who were suspected of being witches. And you just know it was the women who used to talk back.
yeah, always.
It's not like somebody saw them floating in the middle of the night. It was just women who stood their ground or, were not conforming to certain, like, societal standards that people would just point fingers and be like, oh, she's a witch. Or maybe she slept with somebody's husband, and they're trying to
The
get back
ones
at her.
the ones who were messing with people's wives, did anybody call them names? But that's not the
Anyway,
story for here. I have a question though. So is it
yeah.
true? I've always heard this about Bakwe tradition, and I feel like we never asked my great grandmother because she could have slapped somebody. Is it true that they said albinos don't die, they sacrifice them to a pasamoto? And I asked this question because growing up in Cameroon, I was given every nickname of albino adjacent. In Cameroon, albinos are called Gengeru, Mukala, Bomblang. I was called Semimux, and I was called Bomblang. And every now and again, somebody would say, "We'll send you to Boya."
That was a thing that I heard. I also heard that growing up. I don't know if it's more myth or folktale than actual fact that something used to happen historically. If there are any Bakuri people listening to this and you have knowledge of this historically, let us know. But I don't know. I've always suspected that it wasn't actually a real thing that used to happen, and they just used to say it to scare children, like light-skinned children.
That was a real threat to my existence growing up. So
Okay, so like I said, we're reviewing The Crown of Thorns, which this is one of my favorite books, partly for nostalgia and partly because it just has a lot of characteristics that I really enjoy. This style of African fiction, the way it's written, I really enjoy it. So the synopsis basically is set in this fictional village, Kokonoko Small Monje, in a country that we know is Cameroon shortly after independence. And in the opening scenes, we meet Gobefor. I think you and I will pronounce their names kind of differently. I don't know which one is correct, but we meet Gobefor, and he's an elder in the village, and he's kind of, accusing somebody who used to be his bestie, Achebefor. He's accusing him of stealing the statue of their god. So Akeko is the god of gods of that village of Kokonokos Momonje. And keep in mind, this is in a polytheistic, society, but that's one of their gods, and Akeko is the most important god of that village. So Gobefor is accusing Achebefor of basically making a replica of Akeko and replacing the real god with that replica. And he knows this because Achebefor is a very skilled carver. And immediately he saw that replica, he knew that there was only one person who could have, made it. So, he's confronting Achebefor in the beginning of the book, and we kind of just immediately get thrown into this. It's kind of what genre would you describe? Like mystery, thriller? Drama, comedy.
Drama.
There's definitely comedy in there too.
Yes, it's a drama. I think it's a lot drama. I don't think it really fits the bill for like thriller suspense, but I might be biased saying that it's drama because the language is very. I'm more
so dramatic.
It's very dramatic. It's very colorful, and it's extremely vivid. It almost feels like you were there, which I guess is a good thing. So yeah, I would put it as drama.
Okay. So, I mean, you're right. It's not really a mystery because at the beginning of the book, we already find out like what has happened and who has done it, basically. Because as Gobefor is accusing Achebefor has this kind of realization, right? And he's
shit.
He's like, yes, I did carve a replica of Akeko, but I only carved it because, the DO, district officer who they call government, asked him to, right? And as he's saying it, you can tell that he himself is realizing the ridiculousness that he got played. And even Gobefor is like, in what world would you think it was okay to carve a replica of our god, even if you didn't know what the intentions were? How could you do, carve a replica of something so sacred? It almost like, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but it's like, drawing a picture of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Like, why would you ever think that it's okay?
It's okay.
So, this is like a huge scandal, right? And in the middle of this storm is the newly crowned chief of Kokonokos Momonje, Alexander Chindia. And this dude does not want any parts of that throne. So as we're moving through the story, we kind of find out that this scandal, right, this Akeko's, like the theft of Akeko is kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. There's just been so many things happening since Chindia was crowned the chief of the village. And as we read the story, it's kind of taking us back, right? Flashbacks of when he was crowned and all of the things that he has been doing basically to disrespect the tradition and the elders of the village. And then another important player, apart from Chindia, is of course the Dio, the person who was the brains behind the scheme to steal Akeko. And we'll talk about it more later, but the Dio is obviously a government-appointed person who kind of clashes because the villagers, they have their traditional authority structures, and post-colonialism, or even during colonization, the government has put their own kind of formal authority that's overriding the traditional authorities. Part of the book is kind of discussing that clash between these new authority structures and the traditional ones that existed prior to colonization. It's definitely, there's a lot going on in the book, just beyond the surface of this, scandal that has happened. I think it addresses a lot of kind of deeper themes. All right. The opening of this book, I don't know why. I thought it was just in Seka, but I think it was every other school. Like, we were just obsessed with the opening line of this book. Not even the
It
opening
was
line.
so
Opening
it was
phrase.
so it was so dramatic. Like from the first word, it sucked you in because it's so vivid. And I think that if you've gone to the village or stayed with any elderly Cameroonian, I think that you can picture this scene. It looks in it has
Mm-hmm.
a very specific image in my mind. Like actually, people stand up like, before they say anything. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like step by step, you can just see it. And like I said, the book is so dramatic for no reason. So it
So
basically captures
dramatic.
you from the because when I read it, I just burst out laughing because it took me back to Form 5 where everybody wanted to reenact this scene and like recite the lines even though it was not we didn't read it as drama. But yeah.
So the opening sentence is Achebefo rose, coughed, and cleared his throat to talk, but words stuck in his throat. And that opening line is like literally that's how the whole book is written. Like, it's very, very dramatic. Like, the actions are described in detail, even the way the characters
They
speak, right?
spit.
Particularly those elders. Those elders. You're right. They'll say something and they speak very indirectly. Say something, spit,
And
continue
he would
talking.
describe the way he describes the projectile where it landed. In one, he
Yes.
almost described the moisture content. I'm like, sir, why?
Yes. And that's what I'm saying, like this. And Linus Asong, he's amongst other African writers who use this style, right? Like, they describe things in kind of disgusting detail, but like you were saying, it really sucks you in. Another book that does this is The Beautiful Ones Are Not
Before
Yet
once, I know
Born.
you're bored. Yep.
My goodness.
I heard that book is disgusting.
It's disgusting, but it's a really good book. The author, like, again, really describing mucus, feces, and just they don't gloss over anything. And again, it's this kind of style, right, of African fiction, and it includes a lot of metaphors and adages. Like, the characters, they don't speak in a direct way. Like, even this
Nope.
scene where Achebefo is Gobefo is accusing Achebefo, he would not just come out and say, I know that you
No.
did this. Walk
He
around
says
the
something
point.
very
Walk around the point.
serious. He goes, something very serious has happened. And actually, before it's like, yes, my first man, what is it? He's just giving riddles after riddles after, and then, yeah,
It's like, bro, get to the point.
No, and then he says, you say a cocoa has been stolen. He said, it is stolen.
Like, the dialogue and the monologues are so drawn out, like, before they want to get to the point. It's, yeah. So, but again, I like that kind of style of writing. I haven't read Things Fall Apart in quite a long time. I don't think might not be
It's not,
as much in there, but it's similar.
it's similar, but it's not, I don't think it's this colorful. But
Right.
it's similar. There's a lot of like the metaphors and all the proverbs and,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. So, Achebefo, basically, we're made to believe that he's innocent, or at least that's what I think, like, based on his reaction. But the DO goes to Chindia, right, who is the chief, and and the DO is very sneaky because he doesn't like come out and directly tell Chief Chindia, like, we should take Akako and sell it to this white man who's going to give us a lot of money. He kind of suggests it to Chindia, and then Chindia kind of says it as if it's his own idea, but really the DO planted his idea in his head. So the DO, goes to Chindia, then Chindia now goes to the elders, because Achebefo is not the only elder who is implicated in this crime, but he seems to be the only one who's actually innocent. Like, he's claiming like he just carved the replica, and gave it to the DO without really knowing
that they were moving or that there was a transfer. At least that's the way it was described.
Do you think, was he naive and gullible, or do you think he's lying to go before that he really didn't know that the plan was to steal the real Akeko and replace it with the replica that he made?
I feel like he did not know the way that he reacted even after, because he came clean immediately, where the
Mm-hmm.
others tried to act like they didn't know, but they were obviously very guilty.
Mm-hmm.
He came clean immediately, and I felt bad for him a little bit, because even the money that he was paid, he still used it to help the chief.
What do you do the money? I don't remember that part.
Part of it, and which is what gave him away, because the chief went to the coast. Yes, the chief went to the coast. He had been in Njangi before he went back
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
to Kokonoko Small Monje, and he said he had 1,000 francs in Njangi. They said, oh, the treasurer had left town, they had dissolved Njangi, and he's like, I want my money. And he was going to get into a public fight with the former president of this group, and go before Achebefo was like, it's not worth it, you're the chief, like, you represent us, don't do that. And basically Achebefo had to give him the 17,000 so that he didn't make a fool of himself in public.
Mm. Okay.
But then the others now watching, like, where did he get that amount of money from? And so I think that was like the first inclination that he had a hand in it.
Yes. So the backstory is that this American, right? He's from Texas. Virchow I don't know how to pronounce it. Virchow, let's call.
Virtual.
He approaches the DO and basically says that, these kind of like artifacts from Africa, like people are paying big bucks for them in museums in America. And of course the DO is greedy. He doesn't respect the culture, traditions, anything of, the people that are under his purview. So of course he thinks of Akekwa and he's like, yeah, I can make a pretty penny by selling Akekwa to this American. So that's how he comes up with this scheme. Solicits Achebefo and Shindia, they make the replica, and the text and Virchow, he's trying to transport it from the coast and he puts it in a coffin, right? Which of course raises a lot of eyebrows, and the customs people go to investigate. They see this statue, and unfortunately for everybody who was involved, there are people from Kokonogos Momonje who live on the coast, and they hear about it. Like, Akeko is, there's somebody trying to smuggle Akeko out of the country in a coffin, and what's his name? Bekomcho.
Bekomcho, yes.
Yes, he's one of the people. He goes back to the village and tells Gobefo now goes to the shrine, and they're not supposed to see Akeko. It's covered under a black cloth or something. Yeah. Gobefo goes, and I don't know how he has the courage to look under the cloth, but of course he immediately sees that it's a replica. And who is the only person who is skilled enough to carve that? His bestie, Achebefo, and that's how, kind of everything gets exposed. And yeah. And I really feel bad for Gobefo. We'll talk about him more later, but he seems like one of the few men with integrity in that elder council. Yeah, and he's kind of fighting a losing battle.
Yeah,
in that regard.
Something that I guess we might talk about it later is just the fact that why didn't the Dio think to sell the one that he carved? Like, if you had a little bit of regard for the people, their customs, their traditions, why didn't he try to sell the fake one?
That's a good question, because you can weather wood to make it look old and antique, kind of antique looking. Maybe it was just that, to your point, he just had that complete disregard.
He didn't care. And then there's a part where Gobefo asks Gobefo, like, who do you know me to be? And he says a carver. And Achebefo is like, is that all I am to you? But I think this was also part of Gobefo's layup to get to the point where, like, who's the only person who would have done this job? But yeah, Achebefo was like really heartbroken, like, that after, because he refers to Gobefo as my first man. It's like, that's my right hand man. And like in Cameroon, like, if somebody is your homie, you'll be like, that's my right hand man. And he's like, first man. And he said, yeah, cover.
I mean, but that just goes to show how betrayed Gobefo felt, right? He was, he was so scandalized. And I didn't know this, but you just sent me that article today about how a lot of people speculate that this story is based off of a real incident that happened. So can you just talk about that briefly?
In the 60s, there was a statue stolen from the Kingdom of Kom, the Afuakom, which also represented one of the highest gods. I think they looked at it was a revered statue. I wouldn't say it was a god, but the people revered the Afuakom, and it was stolen, and it ended up at a museum in New York. And there was a lot of diplomatic talks before it was returned. Legend has it that there were a lot of weird things happening. I don't remember what museum it was at in New York. I should probably look that up. But it is said that a lot of strange things happened while it was there. So eventually it was returned to Com in 1973, and it still sits in Lycom, where the Fun of Com sits in the palace.
Glad that I had a happy, well, somewhat of a happy
Somewhat, but
ending.
it was, yeah, true. They got it back, and I mean, it was desecrated and everything.
Mm.
But it ties to a recent conversation about whether Africans respect art or value art, and whether stolen African art should be returned.
I
Which,
mean,
what are your thoughts?
to your point, right? We say that these things are stolen, and in a sense they are, but a lot of times it's somebody from that local society or a group of people who have, sold
Yeah.
this artifact. Like, some of it was plundered, to be fair.
Yes.
But others of those artifacts, like, there are a lot of people who are like the Dio in this case in real life, and they're selling precious artifacts from their culture.
But here's the thing. In the same way that there's a system, a system set in place to avoid conflict diamonds on the market, the people buying it are also unscrupulous fellows, because I think they will go through a vigorous process to ensure the authenticity and the means with which their possessions were acquired. So because we go to museums every now and again, and I always try to check out the African section. And I remember at the Art Institute in Chicago, they had a section for African art, and they had steel pots from Babungo in the northwest of Cameroon. And they were all donated by American families or people. And I kept telling my daughter, like, where they get it from? Like, they're not from Babungo. How is it theirs? How is it theirs to donate? And I think maybe that's something we should look at, like, how do we trace these things back? Because obviously the Afuakom meant a lot to the people of Com, and they worked hard to make sure that they got it back, and it's ours, whether we take care of it or what we do with it. It is ours. We were not compensated for it. And we also deserve to look at our things and learn our history. Because, like we talked about with Helen, part of the reason why we are in some of the predicaments we are vis-a-vis our culture, what is our culture, who we are as a people, is because we've lost a lot of our history.
That's true. Yeah, to your point about the museums, like, whenever I go to the Museum of Fine Art in Houston, and the African section is one of my favorite, like, I'll always go there first. But there are definitely some Akeko looking, there are some statues in there that are clearly, some carvings were made just for art, right? Every culture historically and present day, they make things just for aesthetic
display
reasons. Yeah, but I would bet that there are, artifacts in their statues, other little things that have, like, religious or spiritual significance that the people of that culture at the time would not have wanted it displayed in public, just like Akeko was even in a shrine and covered with the cloth. So, so I mean, that's going to be an ongoing debate. The Benin bronzes, I think the British Museum is still in negotiation with some group that's trying to, return them, or at least, have them borrowed back to a local museum.
That's part of the thing, the audacity. But before we move on, my one last gripe is something that I've noticed consistently at almost every major museum I've been to. Unless there's a particular exhibit going on, the African art section it's never anywhere there's natural light. It's in the basement. It's almost always exclusively in the basement, in some dark place where you have to seek it to find it. And so when we talk about that, we don't appreciate it. I don't necessarily see that we appreciate it. I feel like it's there so that, everybody is represented, but
Mm,
it's not given a prime time slot. It's not put in a place where you just happen to see it.
that's true.
You have to go find it.
Yeah, in the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, right? Like, and they have different buildings, but in kind of like the main one, when you walk in, to your point about being, in natural light and near an entrance, it is Egyptian, no shade, but this obsession with ancient Egypt. They have the room there, and it's kind of out in the open, and then they have, after that, when you walk in, then it's European and American art and paintings from different eras, right? And then you go kind of, it's not in the basement, but it's definitely, to your point, you have to go look for it. The African art, Asian, Muslim, Buddhist art, it's kind of not at the forefront of the immediate exhibits when you're walking in. So yeah, that's a good point.
And on the British Museum, the last time I went there, I went with a Greek family. They too want their shit back.
Everybody wants their shit back. The British Museum is going to be empty. But you know what I heard about the British Museum, which is wild, is that majority of the artifacts that they have are not even on display. Like, they have so much stuff, they don't even
Yeah.
have the space to display majority of it, which is wild. Like, give people their shit back if you're not even putting it on display.
I just found out that one of the museums in Germany is going to be closed. Is it for 11 years? They're doing some renovations. So they have the original gates from some garden. I want to say it's either Babylon. Was Babylon Lebanon or Iraq? I think it's Iraq.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's
It's like the original. I saw it and I was just like, I want to go there. Then that's when I found out it's closed for 11 years. For the next,
damn.
I mean, we see the war that has happened in the Middle East, and I know people who were in the army who went to Iraq and talked about how they plundered things from Saddam's palace and everything. Like, I know people who said that to me. And so you think about, like, would it have been preserved? But it's always a fine line because, yeah, there are the places that have ended up in war. Would it have gotten preserved? But again, there's no compensation, and that's another thing that bothers me. There's no compensation, there's no reparations because you can say, oh, it was acquired, but there's no good faith in the way that they talk about it, like, oh, you will not take care of it, you will not do this, but it's not yours.
It's not yours. That's a very paternal kind of sentiment.
I know
But
better. I can take care of it better than you.
and to your point about wars, right? You're right. I remember during the Iraq War, there were like very ancient. I don't want to say one of the ancient wonders of the world, but some significant building was destroyed in this Israeli bombardment of Gaza. One of the oldest churches in the world in history was destroyed. Old mosques, libraries and things like that have been destroyed, and they will never be
There's nothing you can do.
replaced.
The owner of Hobby Lobby was opening this big museum of the Bible, and something that came from Mesopotamia was stolen. It's a stolen artifact, and it's recognized that it's stolen. Was going to the museum, and I think Iraq rioted, and like, hey, this was somehow between the fall of Saddam and everything that got missing, but it's ours. And I find it really ironic because, the Bible, good works, and other things, you're out here, stolen property. Okay.
Okay, so back to our story. Like I said, Chief Chindia, he was crowned as the king of Kokonogos after his father died, and they have this catching ceremony where, so it's a patrilineal succession, but it doesn't seem to be like just a straightforward thing. They have to have this catching ceremony where it was between him and his brother Anthony, and everybody, including Chindia and Anthony, assumed that Anthony was going to be the heir because I think they said Chindia didn't even grow up in the palace, right?
He was
grew up
not, he wasn't, what's his Anthony's country name? Kolak?
Kwalek, something like that.
Kwalek. And
Yeah.
then there was another brother, Nji. And them two were the ones who were being raised as they were going to be
Mm-hmm.
successors and so it said Anthony Kwalek will always console Chindia, like,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, you don't get these benefits. It's okay, it's all right. So yes, he
Mm-hmm.
was never raised, he was not the heir, he was not the spare. He was never
Definitely not.
he was never raised to, like the propriety, which is probably why he was fighting for money on the road, because he was not raised with the expectations and the decorum of what was going to be expected of him as a chief in the future.
Mm-hmm. So on the day of the catching ceremony, to everybody's shock and
They cut.
horror, the catcher or whoever picks Chindia, and Anthony fucking has a temper tantrum. He tears some garment, tears his singlet, tears something, and Chindia runs away. They have to go catch.
Now that I think about it, isn't there an expression? Is it from this, like, somebody got angry so they tore their cloth or like their sacred? I feel like that's an expression I've heard before.
I've heard that Jesus swept and tore his
Jesus wept
garment.
and tore his garment. I
That's not in the Bible, though. They tore his garment part. I don't know why people added that. It's just Jesus wept. That's the verse. It's two
Where
words.
did he tore his garment?
I don't know why that's
Is
not
it
in the
people or is it
Bible.
Cameroonians? Because
It's
I feel like that was the significance of Kwalek tearing his garment too. It was protests. He was an actor.
he was
But
pissed.
on the catching, so later on in the book, it sort of alluded to the fact that the Dio whispered things. They pointed out things that stood out about Alex, which would have made him unfit to be king.
Mm.
So I think there's definitely human influence. Like, although somebody else was groomed, it comes down to the elders picking whoever they think is going to carry out the duties of the chief best for the land.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, ultimately, the elders, I mean, whether or not they didn't admit it, but they really regretted that decision because Chindia, first of all, like I said, he runs away. They have to go and catch him and bring him back to attend his coronation. And then, like, he is just hell bent on disrespecting the tradition just to show that, like, he just does not want to be there. And I don't know why. I think he only came back and decided he had a period of kind of isolation, right? As part of their tradition, like the chief has to go through, I don't know, whether it was
21
3 months.
months.
Yeah. So he was kind of counting down, and then also as part of the government policy, chiefs get a salary. And that was another reason why, he was kind of sticking it out. He's like, let me just do this, that stupid 21 moons, and then I'll get out of here and I'll still be collecting my salary. And man, he's really a thorn in the side of the elders. So he does like a lot of things just to piss them off because he does not want to be there. And he feels incredibly guilty because he loved his brother so much. Yeah, he feels like he has stolen something he has stolen Kwalek's inheritance, basically. And he feels guilty. So some of the things that he does to piss off the elders and just like disrespect the tradition, he refuses to drink from the royal horn, which I'm sure if anybody, even if you're not Cameroonian or African, you've seen kind of this, is a bullhorn or whatever,
Yeah, I think so.
that they use as a cup, basically. And it has, significance. Like there's a royal horn. He refuses to drink from that. He refuses to smoke the royal pipe. He smokes his Benson and Hedges. And then, I don't know if he has a royal garb that he's supposed to wear, but he insists on wearing his white button-down shirt and blue jeans, in the palace. And because he's the chief, he inherits all of his father's wives, plus a new wife that they give him. And I'm quoting from the book here, a virgin wife to, quote, wash his genitals. Right? And listen, when we were in secondary school, that thing used to tickle us.
Because they will not say it. They will be trying to say it in every way but the way in which it was written. I wonder if what came out first, this book or Coming to America?
This book was published originally in 1990.
So Coming to America came out first.
Anyway, yeah, so he's given like a virgin wife,
To
that
wash.
he's to wash his genitals. He's supposed to sleep with her. He refuses to sleep with that girl, and she's so ashamed. So he kicks her out.
She sleeps on the floor. She slept on the floor in his parlor so people will not know.
Yes, he kicks her out. He's like, get out of here. And she's so ashamed to go out of his house or hut so people will not see us. She sleeps on the floor.
Mm.
Again, he has all these wives, some inherited, some given to him, right, as gifts. We'll talk about the misogyny in this book later, but they have gifted, his virgin wife was the daughter of another chief that they have given him. And then he had his own wife that he was married to before all of this, Angelina. And he refuses to eat the food of any other of his quote-unquote wives except Angelina. And there's this ceremony, I don't know if it happens every day, where the women bring the food and he's supposed to like dip his finger and lick each one and go around. And they said he would just dip his finger and not lick and would just... And he was being so disrespectful.
He was a menace to society, man.
He was really a menace. Like, he didn't give a damn. He did not.
But you know what, though? I can understand in some ways his predicament, right? He was in a lose-lose situation because he was never raised for this role. And like we were saying before we started recording, King Charles was born to be his mother's successor by virtue of his place in the birth line, right? He was raised to be that. And that man is 70-something years old. He finally just got the job. He's waiting for his mother to die his entire life. That's all he's been. And so imagine that his mother died and somebody decided, you know what, we're gonna give it to your sibling. Like, they would have raised hell too now. Like, so if he tore his garment and didn't slap somebody, that's the least of what he can do. And then you have Chindia, who is here with survivors guilt. Like, why me, not him? It was always meant for him. It wasn't meant to be me. And then he writes a letter to his brother. The Dio intercepts it, goes to report to the elders what's in it, probably to curry favor. I don't know what his intent, but it's obvious that there were machinations. The Dio was involved in picking him. And we know that what's his name? Kwalek went abroad to university. And I suspect there might be some of that in why he did not want him, because he was definitely more educated and probably somebody who would have challenged him. And the thing about the chiefs getting paid I would say like in West Cameroon, at least that's what I was told by my dad. There were like class 1 chiefs, 2, like a paramount chief. And then you had... And those designations, I think, were based on population, but also how much money that you got paid, because British practiced native authority rule. And because of that, they ruled through the local chiefs. And I guess that's why they paid them. And then when colonization came and we get this new government, you now have the chief, you now have a DO or the government officer. They started eliminating the benefits that the chiefs had become accustomed to. And so the new chiefs did not like it because it's a change in their lifestyle. You have the fun of my village, who is a paramount chief, but he's a permanent. He's always, asking for donations. He's always in need. And I would say part of that need is what has driven a lot of the chiefs to get into politics today. Because I believe they should be neutral. But you have a lot of chiefs who have gotten in bed with the government. And I think not because of any ideology, they're just trying to get paid, because those palaces need to be repaired. There's maintenance, polygamy is encouraged. I've heard that if you have a sister or a female relative who gets married into the royal family, just know that that's your burden for life. If you want your family member to be taken care of, you have to take care of this lady and her children. There's not enough funds to go around. And so it's just like a lose-lose situation where he was not going to win, but he did not even have any couth. Like, he was just uncouth. He was fighting on the road for money. There was a time when Achebefo, when they decided to go make peace with him after he had thrown his tantrum, Achebefo had to come tell Ngobefo that he saw him fighting with Gangabe. Gangabe is a hot head.
Listen.
This is the person that you say, this person pissed me off. You like, say let's go. Let's go. That's your fighter. And he's fighting with Gangabe. Gangabe says he gave 2,550. The chief is swearing that Gangabe gave 2,500, and you are fighting. Gangabe spat in front of the chief, which is disrespectful, for 50 francs.
So Gangabe, right? Like he's the hothead of the village, like you said. So when the elders, they kind of find out, everybody go before tells them like, hey, Akeko has been stolen. They're pointing fingers at everybody. They all know the Dio is involved because he's the only one who has access to a lorry that would be able to transport Akeko, the statue, to the coast. So clearly he's in on it. They're still trying to figure out how Chindia is involved, but they know. So they're like, we're going to Dio's house. They go to his house and confront him. And like I said, the Dio, I don't know if he is from Kokonogo Small Monje, that tribe, or surrounding tribe. Okay, that's why he just disrespects their tradition.
He's not. He's from one of the first tribes that got subdued or colonized, where once they made contact with colonizers, they gave away everything. And so when independence came and they were looking for people to spread the dogma and theory, they went to the people from, he's from the coastal area, because they were the ones to relinquish.
That's Bakuri, but not too much of my people now. Anyway, that's the Bakuri, basically. That's us. And so they go, right, and they confront him, and first of all, he tells his guard to tell them that he's sleeping, and they refuse to go. He comes out, and is it this scene or another scene where Gangabe is talking shit and he locks him up in his dog's cage?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Gangabe in the dog's cage. It must be in the another time when they come. I'm like, wow. But you made a point about the British using local rulers, right? They did that, but there were cases where they actually gave people more authority than they originally had.
Yes.
So in Limbe, which was known as Victoria at the time, they gave, I'm not going to call the name of the person because his descendant is my classmate, but they gave this person like authority. They basically, it's kind of like they made him a paramount chief when he was actually not. And because of that, he got a lot of land that was not originally part of his family's land. And I actually read an academic paper about this. Somebody has published a paper in a journal about the fact that because of this British, rule, this family ended up with a lot of valuable land in Limbe that was not originally theirs. Yeah. So that's an example. Even though they were using, native rulers, they still interfered with a lot of things in that way. And that they were giving the people who were amicable to them, like they were definitely giving them more power.
In Nigeria, it is said that the British preferred the Hausa to the Yoruba and the Igbo because the Hausa, I want to say maybe because of the Islamic influence also, where it's almost like a feudal society. So once they had the people at the top, like they had the emirs in their pocket, then there's not going to be any uprisings. They could control the people, and they found them to be more docile. Where if you know anything about the Igbo, they're ready to fight. Like about women's riots, and the Yoruba too, hold their own. And that power structure is something that still affects Nigeria to this day, where there's constantly the need to balance power, or whether you have more Hausa in the military. And it's like Nigeria just feels like it's always on a scale where there's a very careful balance where if you tip it over on one side, shit will hit the fan.
So the Dio is definitely he's definitely a very scheming character, right? To your point, he's playing people against, he makes Chindia kind of believe that he's on his side because there are these two quote unquote Western educated men. And he's kind of, to Chindia, he's like, I understand what you mean about those, villagers, those, primitive people. But then to the elders, to your point, he's kind of intercepting Chindia's letters to his brother, which was really cruel because Anthony was in an accident and he died without ever reading that letter that Chindia wrote to him. So that was a really cruel thing for the Dio to do. But yeah, he's definitely playing both sides. He's corrupt, he's greedy, and his character really reminds me of a lot of Cameroonian politicians in that sense, like that greed and just trying to make money every little opportunity that he sees. without any regard to the harm that he's causing to the
They
people
don't
around
care.
him.
They don't care. And I think it's because of the centralized system of government. The deals are not always local to the area. They don't care
Mm-hmm.
about the people, they don't care about their customs. And I think, especially at the start, like in the beginning, post colonization, where it's not completely westernized, there's still souls to be won and other
Mm-hmm.
such things, they don't see themselves as part of the community. You can tie it to, like, in the US where they say local policing, you want police to come from the community. So they have a
Mm-hmm.
sense of shared empathy. They have shared goals with this community. Not that you're coming to work every day. You want to get to know people. And so, yeah, the Zio looks down on these, they're probably primitive, these plebeian, primitive people who he cannot relate to, doesn't care about, and is just
Mm-hmm.
trying to see what he can get out of them. And because eventually he will be transferred somewhere else.
Agreed. So the Dio and Chindia kind of represent this new class, right, that I think came about as a result of colonization, because they're these Western educated Cameroonians who have really, they were the OGs of internalized anti-blackness and white supremacy, because because they're Western educated, they think that they're better than people like the elders of the village, who are obviously illiterate according to Western standards. And you see a lot of that amongst Bakuri people. Unfortunately, I think that's because we were one of the first, Douala and Bakuri, one of the first people who came in contact, obviously, with the colonizers. I'm going off on a tangent, but if you ever hear Bakuri people talking about Northwesterners, for example, not all of them, but even people in my generation, they're extremely tribalistic. I'm like, people in America,
When
it
I was in
actually
Form
blows my
1,
mind.
when I was in Form 1, my friend who was Bakri called me Kam No Go, which was basically
Listen,
a derogatory name at
yes,
that point in time, where the governor of the Southwest, Obempita Ashu, God not rest his soul, decided that he was doing divide and conquer. All the problems in the Southwest were because of the Northwesterners who were there. So he started calling them Kam No Go, which means you come and never leave. They came and never left. And I got into an argument with this girl, and she called me Come No Go. Like, bruh, at 10.
people, listen, I'm telling you that people of our generation still have those kind of sentiments. They speak like that in a derogatory manner towards particularly Northwesterners, but people from other parts of the country. And like, it blows my mind. Like, they are the example of, like, they're kind of the coons of Cameroonian society. Yeah, so the DO really, him and Chindia kind of represent that class of people that were created, right, as a result of colonization. And then on the other hand, we have Gobefo, who really is a representative of the traditionalist,
Yeah.
right? He's fighting so hard to preserve the culture, the traditions, the history, and Chindia is just thumbing his nose up at him. So let me ask you this question, right? Let's just say that Chindia was, going along with the traditions, and he was not causing all this chaos, and the DO respected the tradition and culture. Over time, would people like Gobefo not still be fighting a losing battle? Like, would we not have lost over time? Don't you just lose? Maybe lose is not the right word, but change, right? We talked about when Helen came on the podcast. Is that not inevitable?
You would embrace change, but I think there's good faith. And I do
Mm.
believe at the start of the story, they started with good faith, right? Because there was a known successor. There was the
Mm-hmm.
person that the fund had picked, or that was to be successful, and everybody knew that. And then they listened to the deal, which they were open to change, because he pointed out maybe this person is not a good fit for, and they trusted his opinion, because they told him, they said, you didn't choose him. We made that, we caught him, but we listened to you and we agreed with the things that you said, but it was not, you did not choose him. And so I don't think that they were that opposed to change.
Mm.
I just think it was the change agent was not very honest. Because when I think about change, I would use an example of, might be a bad example, of mass in Cameroon, right? I was listening to a podcast where they're talking about, oh, Catholic mass, 45 minutes and you're out. I'm like, y'all have never been to a Cameroonian Catholic mass. And the element of the mass that I think that I find, because they said like back in the day when mass started, they used to say the mass in Latin, and the priest used to back the congregation. So he would say mass with the congregation behind his back. And then I think it was in 85 or so, Pope John Paul II, they had this thing called Ecclesia in Africa, which was essentially meet the people where they are. And so they started incorporating elements of the tradition into the church, which is why in Cameroonian Mass, you have lectionary procession. It is There's a direct line from tradition, the peace plants symbolic, which is supposed to bring peace, and they have cutlasses in church and they carry the
Mhm.
Bible. It's the same thing that you would do in a traditional ceremony, but you've brought it in church. The bag is a traditional bag. And so it's that kind of way where everybody met, right? That's your tradition. When you're at Mass and they're doing that, you feel a sense of like, we are doing this. This is our culture, but we're also celebrating in church. And it's like a union of the two things.
That's a really good point. And I don't think, I mean, I have many gripes with the Catholic Church. Like, if the Catholic Church has no haters on this earth, then I'm dead. But that's one way I think that they are more progressive than, let's say, Baptists or Presbyterians, because I don't think the Protestants really would do that, that I've seen. I know they have
I
country
don't
talk
know.
choirs and, they sing in their country talk, but in terms of actually doing more kind of ritual linked things, I haven't seen it, or maybe I don't recognize it. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's to me that's one way. It's a fusion of the two, and it was part of like pushing, because how you gonna come and be saying the mass in Latin? Well, what you saying? They've adapted the mass to different languages. There's a Wondo mass, which I absolutely love. There's
Hmm.
Banso mass. There's all these different cultures, and like I said, when people see themselves in these things, then it's easy for them to be open to listen, to try to understand what it is about. So I think Gobefo was not resistant to change. It's just the
Hmm.
change agent was the issue.
Speaking of, you just reminded me, the first printing press that was opened in Cameroon was opened in Limbe by a missionary. And what was the first thing that they printed? It was a Douala version of the Bible.
Yeah.
So there you go.
In the Grassfields area, the first native Bible was printed in Mungaka, because while the Bakri and Doualas were holding down the fort at the coast, in the interior, the Balinyonga were holding down the fort, and so the Basel Mission, which I think became the Presbyterian Church, was headquartered in Bali, and so the first Bible that they used in the interior was translated to Mungaka, which, because the Basel Mission was German, if you speak German, it's a lot easier to read that, because the intonation and all of that was written based off of the German alphabet.
That's fascinating. Okay, so I wanted to touch on this, right? We've spoken on the podcast before how some people kind of romanticize
Yesteryears.
pre-colonial, African societies, like they were this kind of utopia, but they were, first of all, they were not monolithic, right? There were many different traditions, even within what we now call Cameroon. There were
Yeah.
some patriarchal societies, there were matriarchal, but like we said earlier, there were some harmful traditions, right? Pre-colonial. And one of the things we see in this book is a lot of patriarchy. We talked about how inheritance of the crown was patrilineal. So I don't even know if Chindia's dad had any daughters, but clearly there's not even any discussion. I'm sure he did because he had so many wives. There's not even a discussion. It's like the sons were going to inherit the crown. They give him a virgin girl. Did they say how old she was?
No, but then they said something about she has seen her flower, so it sounds like she was prepubescent.
Right, like very very young teenager. She was definitely a teenager. So yeah, there definitely, we see what I would consider harmful and oppressive patriarchal traditions in this book. And again, I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, like when Africans, we kind of talk about, oh, colonization did this, it did that. We romanticize pre-colonial African societies, to a
Yeah.
way that I think is not helpful.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people look at it because, like, there were kings, there was the king's court. What about the people who were indentured servants who never had freedom? I don't think that we think about those people, or people who were captured, right? It seems like there were always wars going on, and so there was always the conqueror and the conquered. And for some people, it was not an ideal life. Or think about the warriors who were born to fight. These people never knew peace a day in their lives, and you never knew what day would be your last day. And well, I serve at the behest of the king.
Yeah, and that's something that's missing from the conversation, right? Like when we talk about this quote unquote, we was kings, like this kind of sentiment that, oh, Black people, we were kings before all of this, before slavery, before colonization. Like, no, there were societies just like any other that had class structures. There were peasants. Everybody was not, wealthy. There were people who were enslaved, not chattel slavery, right? Like happened in the US, but there were systems
there were
where people were enslaved. Yeah.
Yeah, you could win your freedom, but you were still enslaved.
There was still very much class, there were class differences, right? And
yeah.
In a lot of societies, it's not something that you could necessarily work your way out of, right? You couldn't necessarily become wealthy and then change, especially when we talk about tribalism, right? It's not like, I'm a merchant and I've become wealthy, and so automatically that means that I have access to marry anybody that I want. Absolutely not. Like, what do they call that thing? Your pedigree was definitely a thing that mattered, right? It was not like an equal kind of land of opportunity for everybody.
Yeah.
It reminded me of that. You told this story on a recent episode that we had about, was it your grandfather who was like the police chief and somebody told him what business?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So I enjoyed the book.
Me too.
It was good to reread it, because I think the last time I read it, I haven't read it since GC. So it was good to reread it and look at things with more knowledge about the systems and because I really do sympathize with Chindia. He drew. I do. And maybe I'm taking too much from reality to look at his situation, but it's just like he had no choice, right? He did not have a say. They caught him. He was not able to run. And then, wrong, that he was looking forward to the salary, the one thing that was like, okay, at least I'll get paid. And then they took that away from him. And I also say, like, he was never raised for this position. He was not the heir. He was not the spear. Nobody, like, there were obvious things they did for the others because they were looking to them to lead. And he didn't get that training, which is why he's out here acting a fool.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If he thought that he was in the running from young, he would have moved differently. He would have done, he would have done things differently. Yeah, for sure. I really, like I said, I really enjoy this book. I've read it at least 3 times, maybe 4, but I read it again most recently earlier this year. If you like books like this, like I said, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Again, very disgusting detail, but it's a good book. Again, it touches on corruption. I think that one is based in Ghana.
Yeah, it's written by Ayikwe Arma.
Definitely recommend. Another book that touches on stolen religious or spiritual artifacts is Foreign Gods by Okendibe. I should read that one. Yep, Foreign Gods. And then if you are interested in, we didn't really talk about this, but it is present in this book, the Christian missionaries, right? There's a character in this book, Father Martin, or whatever his name is.
Preston. Martin is a...
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So this book also touches on like the dispossession of land, from the native people by, in this case, it's a Catholic priest. So if you're interested in that kind of theme, definitely read Crown of Thorns, but also read The Poor Christ of Bomba. That's also one of my other favorites.
Is that Mongo Betty?
Yes, okay. The priest in that book, my goodness me. Like, if you hated Father Preston, the priest in The Poor Christ of Bomba, I mean, the condescension with which he treats like the native people, like he's slapping adults, like it's
I mean,
crazy.
I think Father Preston would have tried it if given the opportunity. It's just Gangabe was not playing games with him.
Yeah, so definitely those are some recommendations. Okay. We will announce our November book of the month in the next episode. We need to spin our wheels a little bit because the season 2 is fast approaching its end. So I think November's book is
Probably
going to be the last
the
one.
last one.
Yeah, so we wanna make it something good. Okay, if you're not already following us on YouTube, please subscribe at 2Bs in a Pod, and we're on Instagram at 2Bs Pod. Go over there and wish us a belated happy birthday. Subscribe on all of the things, your favorite, podcast streaming platform, YouTube, Instagram. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And until next time.
The fly followed the corpse to the grave because it had nobody to advise it.
So this is from the book Crown of Thorns, and Gobefo says this to Chindia. I don't know what they were talking about, but yeah, there's so many of these little proverbs in the book.
It's true. If you consider that they died.
I love this one. The fly followed the corpse to the grave because Gobefo is basically telling him like, we gave you advice as your elders and you refused to take it. Now here we are.